Hi, this presentation is on the roots of toxic positivity for Psych 305 History and Systems by Robin Dion for Dr. Lucy Faricello of Concordia University. We will discuss what is toxic positivity, what are its roots and known history, our ancestors' understanding of it, how they identified and dealt with it before the term toxic positivity was even coined, what is the zeitgeist today around toxic positivity? And finally, how study and statistics are being used to recognize the negative impacts of toxic positivity. What is toxic positivity and why did I choose toxic positivity? Well, toxic positivity sounds like a paradox, doesn't it? How can something that is supposed to be positive turn out to be toxic? What I find so fascinating about studying this relatively new psychology topic is that it is a prime example that goes to show how the field of psychology is constantly evolving and improving. Now we know that in the world of social media, more than ever, we hear and see the affirmations of mentors and life coaches. Just read some of these lines. We only need to scroll for a minute before we come across these classic memes and catchphrases. So where does this come from? Professor Dr. Stephanie D. Preston of Michigan University on the right here claims that the exact roots of toxic positivity are not exactly known, but that it stems from American culture. What is the zeitgeist today around toxic positivity? On the left, we have a couple of examples that we've likely seen before. During the COVID-19 pandemic, rainbows often painted by children could be seen with the catchphrase, "Ça va bien aller," or "everything will be okay." Now, we tend to understand that the message behind this comes from a good place. Yet at the same time, to deny that things could potentially not turn out okay is ultimately to severely underprepare ourselves for what could go wrong otherwise. What was tiresome about these rainbows to me personally is that people were posting them at the time when we were least certain about what would happen. Now that we are over the hill and the worst of COVID is likely behind us, these rainbows seem to have disappeared. I can only imagine how frustrating this kind of message might have been to someone that lost a loved one despite these constant positive reaffirmations. Next, on the right side, we can see a couple of examples of how Western culture has attempted to deal with toxic positivity. Monty Python's Life of Brian uses black humor to make a mockery of it. At the end of the movie, all the prisoners are being crucified, yet one of them goes on to sing, "Always look on the bright side of life." Before long, thousands of them are singing in unison. Of course, the absurdity of the toxic positivity in this situation is quite clear, even disturbing, I would add. We might ask ourselves, if the use of toxic positivity is so obvious in such an extreme example, then how and when will we know where to draw the line? Another example is one used by actors and musicians. Break a leg before someone is about to perform. Why would we say something as negative as this so as to suggest to someone that they actually go out and injure themselves during a performance? Perhaps this superstition arose from a realistic understanding of toxic positivity and the additional stress that might be incurred on someone by wishing them good luck or assuring them that they'll do great when we don't actually know how they'll perform at all. Next question to ask ourselves is, can we even force happiness? There is something particularly eerie and disconcerting about a sad clown, even so that it has become noticeable within our culture. Three pictures here depict cultural stories of clowns and the irony of their sadness. In the first picture we have Motown legend Smokey Robinson that wrote and sang The Tears of a Clown. Beside him we have the late Pavarotti singing the theatrical play of Pagliacci, who was forced to go on performing despite his broken heart. Lastly we have the latest Joker, who looking quite depressed stands in front of a mirror that states, "Put on a happy face." Clowns and jesters are meant to make us laugh, yet at the end of the day we know full well that it isn't an act. Why this irony? Perhaps it is the constant unrealistic state of happiness they force upon themselves that prevents them from experiencing what it is to be authentic. The Stoics, perhaps the earliest philosophy that represents a strong example of the human struggle against toxic positivity, stems from the Stoics. The philosophy was founded by Zeno of Citium, shown on the right here, in ancient Greece, Athens. There is even a Stoics Bible. The Stoics essentially believe that the road to happiness, or eudaimonia as they refer to it, could be found by accepting the moment and one's path, and to not become consumed with fear or pain in trying to change one's destiny. Seneca, shown on the left here, believed that we suffer more in our imaginations than we do in reality. Epictetus, center, believed that it was not the reward, but the working process towards a goal that ultimately would bring us happiness. He also has said that it was not what would happen to us, but how we would react to it that was important. It seems that humans have tried to interpret through philosophy, legend, wisdom, and mythologies over many years and over many generations in order to help us realize things that could not otherwise be explained nor proven using science. An outlook common in Eastern religions is that there is an equal amount of positive to negative, and that we must learn to accept them through mindfulness in order to reach wholeness. The Taoist yin and yang symbol is an example of this. Opposites such as good and bad, black and white, and so on, together create one. The faith of Taoism is to live in harmony with the Tao. The Tao essentially represents everything in existence. Thus, in relation to this theory, we could infer that to live in harmony with everything, we must accept everything, and everything includes both good and the bad. Next in the middle, we have the classic tale of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. The good Dr. Jekyll is the man the public knows. The evil Mr. Hyde is the uncontrollable shadow side within him that comes out to commit selfish and murderous acts. We also see this common in the legend of werewolves. If you are interested in the mythological interpretation of good and bad, Joseph Campbell is an excellent source. He is quoted as saying that all gods, heavens, and hells reside within us. Sigmund Freud is famous for developing the psychoanalytic method. It seems that many of his theories no longer hold up today. However, as such an influential and prominent figure in the growth of psychology, it is interesting to hear what he has to say about repressing emotions. In his book, The Interpretation of Dreams, he states that when we suppress what we actually want to do, these withheld actions and desires end up becoming represented in our dreams. This is theory, of course, and he admitted that he could not prove this. However, he believed that it is especially true in children. In a set of his lectures on the introduction of psychoanalysis, he goes on to say that emotions that are not expressed become buried within us, and eventually do come out of us, but then in even worse ways. Carl Jung is a notable figure in the field of psychology as well, and the developer of analytical psychology. Much of his work is on the realization, consciousness, and integration of the shadow that we must come to terms with. Rejecting to be unaware or pretending it does not exist might ultimately lead us to become consumed by our shadow. He believed that the integration of our shadows was necessary in order to be able to tame it. As he quoted, "No tree can grow to heaven unless its roots reach down to hell." This basically meaning we cannot become excellent without accepting our terrible. Viktor Frankl was a survivor of the Holocaust and lost much of his immediate family there, including his wife. He went on to develop logotherapy and the concept of tragic optimism. The word logo derives from the Greek word reason. Thus, logotherapy roughly translates into reasonable therapy. In tragic optimism, we must learn to accept our tragedies and move forward with optimism. He was a big believer that success and happiness ensue and cannot be pursued. This translates to by striving to live a good and productive life, happiness follows. Aiming directly for happiness, ironically, cannot bring us happiness. Martin Seligman was elected as the president of the APA of 1998. Here he is seen with the Dalai Lama. He popularized positive psychology, which builds upon logotherapy. He has said that positive psychology is not to be confused with happyology. He discusses how learned helplessness is on the other side of the spectrum from toxic positivity, and that we need to find a realistic, proper middle ground. Now things start to get a little interesting with experimentation. The experiment is known as the putt and pendulum, and was conducted by Dr. Daniel Wegner, who is no longer with us. The test consisted of participants' ability to perform a task after being instructed not to do something. He asked them to hold a string with a weight like plumb bob over crosshairs on the ground, and for them to try their best to keep the string steady and centered above the crosshairs. The movements of the participants were tracked. In the first picture on the left, we can see that a participant was simply asked not to move. We see that the participant clearly moved a little bit, but was generally able to keep the weight more or less centered on the crosshairs. In the second picture, the participant was asked to not move the crosshairs a particular way, in this case up and down. Ironically, from the results we can see that this actually had the opposite effect. It became statistically relevant that the stress of this command made the participant overconscious of the area they were supposed to avoid and actually move into it. Wegner discusses the white bear problem that was written about by Fyodor Dostoevsky. This Wegner refers to as the paradoxical effects of thought suppression, which is known as the ironic process theory or ironic rebound. If we try hard to not think of a white bear, such as the one shown here, we'll end up stuck with it in our mind. Just imagine, which is more likely to make you think of a white bear, saying don't think of a white bear, or saying nothing at all? The irony of toxic positivity is that by trying to eliminate unwanted thoughts, the thoughts end up becoming reinforced. Dr. Brené Brown really makes some good headway in the battle against toxic positivity by making a great point concerning the difference between empathy and sympathy. If we tell someone to simply feel better when we know they are feeling bad, even though this might be well-intentioned, it really stands in stark contrast than if we consider what someone acting with empathy would do. Empathy is the ability to be able to feel what another person is feeling, while sympathy is to feel compassion for them. If we are able to feel what another person is feeling, we will not invalidate their feelings, because to do so would be to invalidate our own feelings. Thus, the next time we hear or think of something that might be within the range of toxic positivity, it would be wise to consider whether we are acting with sympathy or empathy. Here are other notable mentions of therapists from the field. Notice how they all make mention of how important it is to acknowledge our emotions. This brings us to second wave positive psychology, also known as positive psychology 2.0. This is the latest trend in the study of positive psychology. It is led by Dr. Paul Wan along with Tim Lomas. Time and further study will tell how second wave positive psychology will continue to evolve and prevail, hopefully, over toxic positivity. I wanted to close with the movie Inside Out from Pixar, because it just captures the concept of toxic positivity so well and inspired me to cover this topic. If you haven't already seen the movie, I highly recommend it. Basically, there are 5 miniature characters that represent universal emotions, all within the mind of a young girl. There is a character for joy, anger, disgust, fear, and sadness. The girl is unaware of these characters inside her mind, but they all are major influencers on her life. The character Joy represents happiness, and she begins to dominate all the other emotions, believing that all thoughts should be happy. Yet, as the movie demonstrates, the girl does not feel complete and begins to become depressed in this constant, unrealistic state of positivity. Finally, Joy realizes, and in this scene on the right, we see her handing over happy thoughts to the sadness character in order to allow the girl to experience her full range of emotions, including sadness. This allows her to feel again and makes her realize how much she truly misses and loves her family and wants to return back home. Well, there you have it. Thank you for staying with me all this time. I hope you enjoyed this presentation on toxic positivity. Here are the last 3 slides, which conclude all the references. Thanks for your time.